When I turned 65, I hosted a party for my family. No one showed up. On that very same day, my daughter-in-law shared photos of everyone on a cruise. I simply smiled. Upon their return, I presented her with a DNA test that visibly startled her. "I'm happy you're here. Come along with my story until the very end and tell me the city you're watching from in the comments, so I can gauge how far my narrative has spread." I dedicated 3 weeks to preparing for my 65th birthday celebration. 3 weeks were spent selecting the ideal menu, adorning the dining area with fresh blossoms, and confirming attendance with every guest. I even acquired a new outfit, a navy blue dress with delicate pearl buttons, the kind Elliot always said lent me an air of elegance. The table was set for 8. Place cards were inscribed with my most elegant penmanship. Elliot Meadow, little Tommy, who had just reached 7, sweet Emma, who was 5, my sister Ruth, her husband Carl, and naturally myself positioned at the head of the table where I could observe everyone's expressions as we celebrated together. By 6:30, not a single guest had arrived. I checked my phone 3 times, convinced I might have misremembered the time, but there it was in my calendar. Birthday dinner, 6 p.m. I had dispatched reminders to everyone merely 2 days prior. At 7 o'clock, I phoned Elliot, straight to voicemail, then Meadow's phone. The same result. Ruth also didn't answer, which was unusual as she typically answers very promptly. I stood in my dining room gazing at the untouched place settings. The candles I had lit an hour earlier had burned down to mere nubs. The roast was growing cold in the oven. The chocolate cake I had dedicated the entire morning to creating sat perfectly, uncut, on the kitchen counter. Perhaps there was traffic. Perhaps something unexpected arose at the last moment. These things occur, I reasoned with myself, despite the tightness in my chest and the uncontrollable tremor in my hands. By 8 o'clock, I understood they were not coming. I sank heavily into my chair, fixated on the vacant seats surrounding me. This was no longer mere tardiness. This felt like something entirely different. The quiet in my home felt altered. Not peaceful, but empty, as if the house itself was holding its breath. It was then that I made the regrettable decision to check Facebook. There, at the top of my feed, was a photograph that sent a chill through me. Dinner aboard a cruise ship. Meadow, radiant in a flowing white sundress, her arm around Elliot, who was smiling more broadly than I had seen in months. Behind them, the vast expanse of the ocean stretched out endlessly. The caption declared, "Living our best life on the Mediterranean. So grateful for this amazing family getaway." I scrolled further, viewing more images. Tommy and Emma constructing sandcastles on a pristine beach. Ruth and Carl toasting with drinks at what appeared to be a sophisticated ship's bar. Everyone was present. Everyone, that is, except me. The timestamp indicated the photos had been posted just an hour earlier, while I was seated here, awaiting them. They were thousands of miles away, clinking glasses of champagne and laughing during some sunset dinner on a cruise ship. I felt a fissure within my chest. Not a complete break, but a crack, like ice on a lake when the temperature plummets too rapidly. They had orchestrated this, all of them. Meadow had arranged a family vacation that deliberately excluded me, timed it for my birthday, and somehow persuaded everyone to participate. Even Ruth, my own sister, who had assisted me in selecting decorations for this very party just last week. I stared at that photograph until my eyes stung. Meadow's smile seemed particularly luminous, almost triumphant. She was positioned exactly where I ought to have been, at the heart of my family, surrounded by the individuals who should have cherished me the most. My phone vibrated, a text from Elliot. "Sorry, Mom. Forgot to mention we'd be out of town this week. Meadow booked a surprise trip. Happy birthday, though. Forgot to mention, as if a Mediterranean cruise were something one simply overlooked mentioning to their mother, as if booking it on my birthday were a complete coincidence." I placed the phone down gently, fearing I might hurl it against the wall if I held it any longer. The roast was undoubtedly cold by now. I walked to the kitchen and switched off the oven. my movements feeling automatic and peculiar. I felt as though I were observing myself from outside my own body, watching this forlorn woman in her navy blue dress, clearing away a meal that no one had attended. I wrapped the cake in plastic and placed it in the refrigerator. I extinguished the remaining candles. I began returning the fine china to the cabinet, each plate making a sound against the others that seemed excessively loud in the quiet house. Meadow had achieved a victory tonight, though I wasn't entirely certain what game we had been playing. All I knew was that for the first time in my 65 years, I felt utterly invisible, not merely overlooked or forgotten, but completely erased. As I switched off the dining room lights, I caught my reflection in the darkened window. I appeared somewhat smaller, diminished. The woman gazing back at me had spent decades serving as the family's mediator, the one who resolved disagreements and remembered everyone's birthdays and anniversaries, the one who consistently prioritized family, and they had all chosen to spend my birthday acting as if I did not exist. I ascended the stairs to my bedroom, each step feeling heavier than the last. Tomorrow, I would have to confront the aftermath, the insincere apologies, the justifications regarding miscommunication, Meadow's sweet tone explaining how the trip had been booked months in advance and there was nothing they could do. But tonight, I simply needed to sit with this anguish, to truly experience it, because something told me this was not solely about a missed birthday party. This was about something far more significant and considerably more deliberate than I had ever conceived. I did not sleep that night. Instead, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every family gathering from the preceding 5 years. The birthday that wasn't just forgotten, it was intentionally undermined. And as the hours slowly passed, other recollections began to surface, each more disturbing than the last. Tommy's 4th birthday party. I had been so eager to witness him blow out his candles. But upon my arrival at the venue, Meadow met me at the entrance with that apologetic smile she had perfected. "Oh, Loretta, didn't Elliot inform you? We had to reschedule the party for tomorrow. A minor emergency arose, yet I could hear children's laughter from within. I could see balloons through the window. When I contacted Elliot later, he seemed genuinely perplexed. Tomorrow? No, Mom. The party is most certainly today. Meadow must have confused the dates. Emma's inaugural day of kindergarten. I had inquired with Meadow 3 times about the drop-off time so I could be present with my camera. Oh, we're doing it extremely early, she had stated. Around 7 a.m. Likely too early for you. When I arrived regardless, the teacher informed me Emma had been present since the usual time, 8:30. I had missed her entering her classroom, missed her slightly nervous wave goodbye to Elliot. Last Christmas, Meadow had contacted me 2 days prior, her voice strained with feigned concern. Loretta, I detest having to do this, but Elliot has been experiencing considerable work-related stress. He requested if we could keep Christmas dinner intimate this year, just the immediate family. I spent Christmas alone, reheating leftovers and watching old films. Later, I learned from Ruth that they had hosted a large gathering. She had seen the pictures on Instagram. 20 individuals, including Elliot's university friends and several neighbors, everyone except me. Each memory felt like a piece of a puzzle clicking into place, revealing a picture I had been too oblivious to perceive. This was not a pattern of miscommunication or innocent scheduling conflicts. This was systematic, calculated. I rose and prepared coffee as the sun ascended, my hands still unsteady from exhaustion and something else, a growing sense of apprehension. I retrieved my phone and began scrolling through Meadow's social media posts from the past year, truly examining them for the first time. There she was at Tommy's school play, seated in the front row beside Elliot. I had specifically inquired about that play, and she had informed me it was cancelled due to a flu outbreak. There she was at Emma's dance recital, the one Meadow had described as merely a practice session, nothing significant. Photograph after photograph of family moments from which I had been excluded, each one captioned with phrases about cherished family memories and gratitude for these individuals in my life. The most agonizing aspect was how natural it all appeared. Meadow's arm around Elliot, the children clustered closely around their parents, everyone smiling as if they belonged together, as if they were complete without me. I put my phone down and walked to my kitchen window, gazing out at the garden I had cultivated when Elliot was a boy. He used to assist me in weeding these flower beds, his small hands gentle with the delicate stems. When had I lost him? When had he ceased to view me as essential to his happiness? The answer arrived with startling clarity when Meadow entered our lives. Before her, Elliot called me twice weekly. We had regular dinner engagements every other Sunday. He would seek my counsel on work-related issues, share anecdotes about his day. He was my son, my companion, my link to a future I had helped shape. Meadow altered that gradually, so subtly that I didn't realize until it was too late. Initially, the Sunday dinners became monthly. Elliot explained that Meadow had been planning these elaborate meals. She enjoys having me all to herself on weekends. Subsequently, the phone calls dwindled to obligatory check-ins on holidays. Sorry, Mom, can't talk long. Meadow has us scheduled quite tightly today. She never uttered anything directly critical of me. That would have been too overt, too easily refuted. Instead, she operated within the nuances of conversation, in the pauses that followed her suggestions. Your mother seems weary lately. Perhaps we shouldn't trouble her with the children this weekend. I saw your mother at the grocery store yesterday. She appeared somewhat uncertain about something. Do you believe she's managing well living alone? Subtle insinuations that I was becoming a burden, a source of concern, someone requiring management rather than inclusion. I considered the way she embraced me at family functions, always a moment too long. Her hand stroking my back as if I were a fragile, elderly relative, needing comfort rather than an equal member of the family. The way she would interrupt when I was speaking to the children, diverting their attention elsewhere. Grandma Loretta has had a long day, sweeties. Why don't you show Daddy your new toy instead? And Elliot, my beloved, trusting son, had absorbed it all without question. He had begun to regard me in the same way Meadow did, with a blend of affection and pity, as if I were something precious but increasingly irrelevant. The phone rang, jolting me from my thoughts. Elliot's name appeared on the screen. Hi, Mom. His voice was cheerful, relaxed in a manner that caused my chest to ache. Just wanted to call and wish you a happy belated birthday. So sorry we missed it, but this trip has been absolutely wonderful. Meadow really outdid herself with the arrangements. I tightened my grip on the phone. Yes, I saw the pictures. Oh, good. Meadow's been posting quite a lot. The children are having an incredible time. Tommy learned to snorkel yesterday, and Emma made friends with a little girl from Boston. You would have loved seeing them. Would I have? Because from my perspective, it seemed no one had even noticed my absence. The trip was very last minute, I stated cautiously. I know, right? Meadow discovered this incredible deal and just went for it. She's always been that spontaneous. One of the things I adore about her. Spontaneous. That's how he described deliberately booking a cruise on his mother's birthday. Elliot, I began, then paused. What could I possibly say? That his wife was manipulating him? That she had spent years systematically isolating me from his life? He would assume I was envious, resentful, unable to accept that he had grown up and moved on. Perhaps I was all those things, but I was also correct. Is everything all right, Mom? You sound a bit off. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of all those lost moments, all those instances where I had been edited out of my own family narrative. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just feeling tired. Well, try to get some rest. We'll be back next week, and I promise we'll arrange something special to compensate for missing your birthday. Another promise from Elliot that Meadow would undoubtedly find a way to circumvent. After I ended the call, I remained in my kitchen for a considerable time, observing the shifting light as morning progressed towards afternoon.
Echoing
I
percussion.
contemplated the years stretching ahead, more birthdays spent in solitude, more milestones of my grandchildren missed, more family photographs in which my absence was so complete it was as if I had never existed. For the first time since my husband passed away 8 years ago, I felt truly orphaned, not by death this time, but by something arguably more devastating, by the deliberate, methodical erasure of my place within the only family I had left. But as resentment surged within me, hot and incandescent, I realized something else. I was not going to fade away quietly. If Meadow wished to play games, she had selected the wrong adversary. I had raised Elliot after his father departed. I had worked 2 jobs to fund his university education, sacrificing my own aspirations to ensure he had every possible opportunity. I had earned my position in this family, and I would not relinquish it without a struggle. I simply needed to determine what I was truly contending with. It was Tuesday morning, precisely 1 week after my abandoned birthday party, when the doorbell rang. I was still in my robe, savoring my second cup of coffee and gazing at the stack of thank you cards I had purchased for a celebration that never materialized. The sound startled me. I was not expecting anyone, and frankly, unexpected visitors had become infrequent in my carefully managed social isolation. Peering through the peephole, I saw a man I didn't recognize. Perhaps mid-40s, with dark hair and worry lines deeply etched around his eyes. He was well dressed but appeared disheveled, as if he had been traveling. His hands were buried deep in his coat pockets, and he kept glancing around nervously, as if uncertain about being there. I almost didn't answer. Following the cruise incident, I was not in the mood for salespeople or evangelists or whatever this stranger might want. But something about his demeanor, the way he seemed to be summoning courage just to stand on my porch, piqued my curiosity. "Can I help you?" I called through the door. "Mrs. Patterson?" His voice was measured, hesitant. "Loretta Patterson, Elliot's mother?" My chest tightened. How does this stranger know my son's name? Who is asking? He was silent for a moment, then uttered something that chilled me to the bone. "My name is David Chen. I need to speak with you about Meadow." I opened the door slowly, keeping the security chain engaged. "What about Meadow?" David Chen appeared even more apprehensive up close. His hands trembled slightly, and there were dark circles beneath his eyes, suggesting he hadn't slept for days. "This is going to sound rather unbelievable, Mrs. Patterson, but I think my son might actually be living in your son's house." The chain suddenly felt weighty in my hands. "What are you talking about, Tommy?" he asked, and the name struck me like a physical blow. The little boy, 7 years old with brown hair, has a scar on his chin from falling off his bike when he was 4. I stared at him, my thoughts spinning. Tommy did have a scar on his chin. Elliot had told me about the bike accident, how worried they'd all been, rushing him to the emergency room. But how would this stranger know that? "I think you'd better come in," I said, my voice barely a whisper. David Chen sat on my couch, seeming ready to bolt at any moment. I offered him coffee, but he shook his head, his hands clasped so tightly in his lap that his knuckles turned white. "I don't know where to begin," he said. "This is going to sound insane. Try me. I've had a very unusual week." He took a shaky breath. "Meadow and we were together for 2 years. This was before she met your son, before she got married. We lived together, talked about marriage, the whole deal, and then she got pregnant." My coffee cup suddenly felt too heavy. I set it down carefully, afraid I might drop it. "I was so happy," David continued, his voice thick with past hurt. "I wanted to marry her immediately, start planning our life together. But Meadow, she kept putting me off. Said she needed time to think, wasn't ready for such a big step. Then one day, I came home from work and she was gone. Just gone. All her things, everything. Like she'd never lived there at all." "Did you look for her?" "Of course I did. For months. Filed a missing person report. hired a private investigator, posted on every social media platform I could think of. Nothing. It was like she'd vanished into thin air. He rubbed his face with both hands. The investigator finally told me to give up. Said, "Some people just don't want to be found." I was starting to feel ill. What does this have to do with Tommy? 3 months ago, I was at a conference in Sacramento, just walking around downtown during lunch, and I saw them. Meadow and a little boy who looked exactly like me at that age. Same eyes, same chin, even the same way of tilting his head when he's concentrating. I followed them for 3 blocks. Mrs. Patterson, I watched that little boy, and I knew he was mine. The room felt like it was spinning. You're saying Tommy is your son? I'm saying I think he is. Meadow was about 2 months pregnant when she left me. If she carried the baby to term, he'd be exactly Tommy's age now. David reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. Look at this. He showed me a photograph of himself as a child, perhaps 6 or 7 years old. The resemblance to Tommy was unmistakable. The same dark eyes, the same stubborn set to the jaw, even the same slight gap between his front teeth that Tommy always tried to hide when he smiled. My hands were shaking now. This could be a coincidence. Lots of children look alike. That's what I told myself at first, but then I started digging. David's voice grew harder, more determined. I hired another investigator, a better one this time, Meadow Martinez. That's not even her real name, by the way. Her real name is Margaret Winters, and she's done this before. Done what before? Disappeared when things got complicated. Left men when they started asking too many questions. The investigator found 2 other men, Mrs. Patterson, 2 other men who had relationships with her that ended the same way. Suddenly, completely, like she'd never existed. David leaned forward, his eyes intense. One of them thinks she might have been pregnant when she left him too. I felt like I was drowning. Why are you telling me this? Why now? Because I've been watching from a distance for 3 months, trying to figure out what to do, trying to decide if I had the right to disrupt a child's life based on suspicions and coincidences. His voice cracked. But then I saw the photos from your cruise, the happy family vacation, everyone smiling and laughing, and I realized something that made me sick. What? You weren't in any of the photos. I looked through all of Meadow's social media, Mrs. Patterson. Hundreds of pictures of family gatherings, birthday parties, holidays. Tommy and Emma are in all of them. Your son Elliot is in most of them. But you're barely there, like you're being written out of your own family's story. The truth of it hit me like a physical blow. I thought about all those missed events, all those last-minute changes, and convenient miscommunications. All those times I'd felt like an outsider looking in at my own family. I started thinking about my own experience with Meadow, David continued. How she isolated me from my friends and family near the end. How she made me feel like I was the problem, like I was too demanding, too clingy. How she convinced me that the people who cared about me didn't really understand our relationship. She's doing the same thing to Elliot, I whispered. I think so, and I think she's doing it to you too, which means if Tommy really is my son, he's not the only victim here. You are too. David reached into his coat again and pulled out a manila envelope. This is why I'm here, Mrs. Patterson. Why? I finally worked up the courage to knock on your door. What is it? DNA test results. I managed to get a sample of Tommy's hair from the barbershop where Meadow takes him. Had it tested against my own DNA. His hands were shaking as he handed me the envelope. I stared at the envelope, afraid to touch it. Inside was information that could destroy my family or save it, and I had no way of knowing which. Before you open that, David said quietly, I need you to know something else. I don't want to take Tommy away from the only father he's ever known. I don't want to traumatize him or disrupt his life. But I can't stand by and watch Meadow manipulate and lie to the people who love him, including you. What are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to help me make sure he's protected from her, from whatever game she's been playing with all of us. David's voice was steady now, resolved. Because if she's lied about this, Mrs. Patterson, what else has she lied about? And who else is she going to hurt? I looked at the envelope in my hands, feeling the weight of whatever truth was inside. Outside, a car door slammed, and I heard children laughing as they walked past my house. Normal sounds of a normal afternoon in a normal neighborhood where mothers didn't steal children and grandmothers didn't get erased from family photos. But my life hadn't been normal for a long time. I just hadn't wanted to admit it. Mrs. Patterson, David's voice was gentle now, almost kind. Are you ready to know the truth? I thought about Tommy's sweet face, about the way he used to run to me with his arms outstretched before Meadow started discouraging those displays of affection. I thought about Emma, who barely knew me anymore because I'd been excluded from so much of her life. I thought about Elliot, my son who'd been slowly poisoned against his own mother. I thought about my empty birthday party and all those family photos where I didn't exist. Yes, I said, and opened the envelope. The DNA results were written in clinical, unforgiving language. 99.7% probability of paternity. The numbers swam before my eyes as I read them again and again, hoping somehow they'd change, hoping this was all an elaborate mistake or cruel joke. Tommy wasn't Elliot's son. My grandson, the little boy I'd watched take his first steps, helped teach to tie his shoes, read bedtime stories to when he was small enough to curl up in my lap. He wasn't my blood at all, and Elliot, my devoted son, who'd named Tommy after his own grandfather, had no idea he'd been raising another man's child. I'm sorry, David said quietly. He was still sitting on my couch, watching my face as I processed the information. I know this must be devastating. I set the papers down with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. How long have you known for certain? Since yesterday, but I've suspected for months. He pulled out his phone again and showed me more photos. Surveillance pictures he'd obviously taken from a distance. Tommy playing at a park. Tommy walking into a school building. Tommy riding a bike down what looked like my neighborhood street. I've been following them sometimes. I know how that sounds, but I had to be sure. You've been watching my family. I've been watching my son, David corrected, his voice firm but not hostile, and trying to understand what kind of woman could steal a child and build an entire life around that lie. The anger came then, hot and overwhelming. Not at David. He was as much a victim as the rest of us. But at Meadow, at the magnitude of her deception, the cruelty of it. She hadn't just lied about Tommy's parentage. She'd built her entire marriage on that lie, used an innocent child as the foundation for a life she had no right to claim. She trapped Elliot, I said, the words coming out harsh and bitter. She got pregnant with another man's baby and used it to secure a marriage to my son. It looks that way. David's expression was grim. The timeline fits perfectly. She left me when she was about 2 months along, just starting to show. If she moved fast, found someone quickly, she could have convinced him the baby was premature or just small. I thought back to Tommy's birth, how excited Elliot had been when he called to tell me Meadow was in labor. He came 3 weeks early, I remembered. Elliot was worried about complications, but the doctor said everything was fine. Because everything was fine. Tommy wasn't premature. He was exactly on schedule for my timeline, not Elliot's. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Meadow's whirlwind romance with my son, the quick engagement, the wedding that happened barely 6 months after they met. I'd thought it was romantic at the time. True love conquering all. Now I realized it was something much more calculated. She needed a father for Tommy before he was born. Someone stable, someone who wouldn't question the timing too closely, someone trusting, David added, someone who wouldn't demand a paternity test because the thought would never occur to him. That was Elliot. Exactly. My son had always been honest to a fault. Incapable of the kind of deception that would make him suspicious of others. He took people at face value, believed what they told him. It was one of his best qualities, and Meadow had weaponized it against him. There's more, David said, and something in his tone made my stomach clench. The investigator I hired found out some other things about Meadow, Things that might explain why she's been pushing you out of the picture. What things? David pulled out a folder and handed it to me. Inside were photographs, documents, what looked like copies of official records. Her real name is Margaret Winters. She's 34, not 31 like she told your son. She grew up in foster care, aged out of the system at 18. No family, no real connections anywhere. I studied a photograph that looked like it came from a high school yearbook. The face was definitely Meadow, but younger, harder somehow. Her hair was different, darker, and there was something in her eyes that I'd never seen in the woman who married my son. A kind of desperate hunger. She's been married before, David continued. Twice. Once to a man named Robert Kim in Nevada. Once to someone called James Fletcher in Oregon. Both marriages ended in divorce within 2 years, both times with her getting significant alimony settlements. She's done this before, I whispered. The pattern's always the same. She meets a man with money or stability, moves fast to lock him down, then systematically isolates him from his support system, friends, family, anyone who might see through her act or ask uncomfortable questions. I thought about how Elliot's college friends had gradually stopped coming around after he married Meadow, how he'd drifted away from his work colleagues, how he rarely talked about his job anymore except to mention how stressful it was, how he'd become increasingly dependent on Meadow for social connections, for emotional support, for everything. She's been isolating him, I said. And you, because you're the biggest threat to her control. Mothers see things other people miss. They ask questions. They remember details from before she came along. David leaned forward, his expression intense. She needed you out of the picture, Mrs. Patterson. Not just distant, completely erased. That's why the birthday party sabotage. That's why all the missed events and miscommunications. She's been systematically training your family to function without you. The cruelty of it took my breath away. But why? If she already had Elliot, if he believed Tommy was his son, why go to such lengths to exclude me? Because you're a witness to the timeline. You remember when they met, when she got pregnant, when Tommy was born. If you'd ever started asking questions, comparing dates, you might have figured out the truth. David's voice was quiet but certain. She needed you to become irrelevant before you became dangerous. I stood up abruptly, pacing to the window where I could see the street where Tommy had learned to ride his bike. The little boy I cheered for, bandaged his scraped knees, celebrated every milestone with. He was still the same child, still sweet and funny and bright. But everything about his place in our family was a lie. What about Emma? I asked, dreading the answer. As far as I can tell, Emma really is Elliot's daughter, born 2 years after Tommy during a time when Meadow and your son were definitely together. But Mrs. Patterson, David hesitated. What? Emma's birth might have been calculated too, a way to make sure Elliot never questioned Tommy's parentage. If Meadow could give him a biological child, he'd be less likely to doubt that Tommy was his too, and it would cement their relationship even further. I felt sick. Everything about my son's marriage, his family, his life for the past 7 years had been orchestrated by a woman who saw him not as a person to love, but as a resource to exploit. And she'd used children, innocent children, as tools in her manipulation. Tommy doesn't know, does he? I asked. Of course not. He's 7 years old. As far as he's concerned, Elliot is his father, and always has been. And Emma, she doesn't know either. She just thinks she has a big brother who looks different from her. Kids don't question these things, but adults did, or they should. And I was starting to understand why Meadow had worked so hard to make me irrelevant. A grandmother who was actively involved with her grandchildren, truly present in their lives, might eventually notice that Tommy bore no resemblance to his supposed father. She might then begin to question family resemblances and genetic traits that didn't align. David, I said slowly, why are you telling me this now? You could have simply requested a paternity test, gone through the courts and fought for custody. Why involve me? He was silent for a long moment, gazing at his hands. Because I understood something when I saw those cruise photos. Meadow isn't just ruining my relationship with my son, she's ruining yours too. And if we don't stop her, she'll continue this with others. What do you mean? She's already starting to distance Elliot from his friends and colleagues, making him increasingly reliant on her for everything. And she's cultivating the children's perception of him as the sole parental figure. Tommy hardly mentions you anymore when I observe them at the park. It's as if she's erasing you from his memory. The truth of his words struck me like a physical blow. I recalled how Tommy had changed in recent months, no longer running to hug me upon my visits, instead seeking Meadow's permission before speaking to me. I had attributed it to him growing up and becoming more independent. But perhaps there was more to it. She will eventually discard Elliot, David continued, just as she discarded me and her previous husbands. But first, she will ensure he has nothing left but her and the children. No friends, no family, no support system. When she's ready to move on, he'll be utterly alone. I closed my eyes, envisioning my son's future, isolated, abandoned, likely financially ruined if Meadow was as calculating as she seemed, with the children caught in the middle, unwitting pawns in a game they didn't comprehend. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. David stood, gathering his papers and photos. "I want you to help me save our family, both of ours, because that's what we are, Mrs. Patterson. Family. You are Tommy's grandmother in every meaningful way, even without shared DNA. And I won't let Meadow destroy that out of fear of the truth." He handed me a business card with his contact details. "Consider it, but don't take too long. They'll be back from their cruise in a few days, and once they are, Meadow will be watching for any sign of you becoming a problem again. If we're going to act, it must be soon." After David departed, I sat in my living room, holding the DNA results and staring at the business card. Outside, the afternoon was yielding to evening, and the house felt quieter than ever. But for the first time in months, the silence wasn't empty. It felt like the calm before a storm. Because Meadow Martinez, or Margaret Winters, or whatever her true name was, had made a critical error. She believed she could erase me entirely, render me irrelevant to my own family's narrative. But I wasn't gone yet, and now that I understood her true nature, I wasn't backing down. I contacted Elliot 3 days after the family's return from their cruise. My voice was steady, rehearsed. I had practiced this conversation numerous times in my mind. "Hi, sweetheart. I was wondering if we could all gather for dinner this weekend. I have something important I'd like to discuss with you and Meadow." There was a pause on the other end. "Is everything all right, Mom? You sound serious." "Everything's fine. I just think it's time we had a genuine family discussion about us, about the future. I've been reflecting while you were away." We had a real family conversation. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear Meadow's voice in the background, though I couldn't discern the words. When Elliot returned to the line, his tone was more guarded. "Meadow wants to know what kind of conversation. She's concerned you might be upset about the cruise timing." Of course, she was concerned. Meadow's instincts are sharp. She likely senses that something has shifted, even over the phone. "Tell Meadow I'm not upset about anything. I just believe it's crucial for families to communicate openly. Don't you?" "Saturday evening would be perfect. I'll cook. Let me check with Meadow and get back to you." The fact that my 38-year-old son needed to consult his wife about dining with his mother would have been comical if it weren't so distressing, but I maintained a light tone. "Certainly, let me know." He called back 2 hours later. "Saturday works. 6. Perfect. I'm looking forward to seeing everyone." That was Thursday. I spent Friday preparing for what I knew would be the most significant conversation of my life. David and I had met twice more since his initial visit, meticulously planning how to present the truth in a manner that would safeguard Tommy while exposing Meadow's deception. The DNA results were securely placed in a manila folder on my kitchen counter, alongside copies of the documents David's investigator had uncovered. Margaret Winter's true identity, her prior marriages, the timeline confirming Tommy could not be Elliot's biological son, everything needed to dismantle the fabric of lies Meadow had woven into her life. I prepared Elliot's favorite meal, pot roast with garlic mashed potatoes and the green beans he had loved since childhood. If this was to be our final family dinner, I wanted it to be memorable for the right reasons, at least initially. Saturday evening arrived, gray and drizzly, typical October weather. I set the dining room table with my best china, the same set I had intended to use for my birthday celebration 2 weeks prior. The irony was not lost on me. They arrived precisely at 6 o'clock. Meadow wore a flowing cream-colored dress that made her appear younger, more innocent. Her hair was impeccably styled, her makeup flawless. She presented as the epitome of a devoted wife and mother, incapable of deceit. Tommy bounded through the door first, brimming with 7-year-old energy and excitement. "Grandma Loretta, I learned to swim on the cruise. Want to see me do the doggy paddle?" My heart ached as I hugged him, knowing the revelation I was about to make would alter everything for this innocent child. "Perhaps after dinner, sweetheart. Go wash your hands." Emma followed more demurely, clutching a small doll with tangled hair. At 5, she was more reserved than her brother, more hesitant around me since Meadow had begun discouraging their affection, but she still allowed me to kiss her forehead before joining Tommy in the bathroom. Elliot hugged me warmly, and for a fleeting moment, I could imagine this was just a normal family dinner. "Something smells incredible, Mom. I've missed your cooking." "You look tired," I observed. He did. New lines creased the corners of his eyes, and he had lost weight. "Work's been brutal lately. The mergers have everyone stressed." He glanced at Meadow, who was surveying my living room as if assessing potential issues. "But Meadow keeps telling me I need to find a better work-life balance. Stress is so bad for your health," Meadow stated, appearing beside us with her customary practice smile. "I keep encouraging Elliot to consider early retirement. We could travel more, spend more time with the children. Early retirement at 38. Another method to make Elliot entirely dependent on her, severing him from his professional identity and income." I smiled back pleasantly. "How wonderful that you're considering the future. That's actually related to what I wanted to discuss tonight." During dinner, I maintained a light atmosphere. The children excitedly recounted their cruise adventures, and Meadow played the role of the perfect mother, cutting Tommy's food and reminding Emma to use her napkin. She was adept at this charade, warm, attentive, utterly convincing. Yet, I noticed details I had previously overlooked. How she interrupted when Tommy began describing how much he missed me during their trip. How she redirected Emma's attention when the little girl inquired why I hadn't accompanied them. How she subtly orchestrated every interaction, controlling the conversation and the expression of affection. After the children finished eating, I suggested they play in the living room while the adults conversed. Meadow immediately objected. "Oh, they should probably get ready to go soon. Tomorrow is a school day, and we like to maintain their routine consistently." "This won't take long," I said firmly, "and I believe what I have to share might significantly impact their routine." A fleeting expression crossed Meadow's face, just for a second, but I caught it. Fear. Once the children were occupied with their toys in the adjacent room, I returned to the dining room where Elliot and Meadow awaited. The manila folder rested on the table beside my coffee cup like a loaded weapon. "So," Elliot began, reaching for Meadow's hand across the table, "what did you want to discuss?" I took a breath, feeling the gravity of the moment. I wanted to discuss honesty, family, and the importance of knowing who we truly are. Meadow's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "That's a bit philosophical for dinner conversation." "Is it?" "I don't think so." I picked up the manila folder, sensing both of them stiffen. "You see, I've recently uncovered some fascinating information regarding family history, genetics, and the significance of medical records and accurate data." "Mom," Elliot said slowly, "what's in the folder?" "The truth." I opened it and revealed the DNA results, placing them on the table between us. These are the results of a paternity test for Tommy. The ensuing silence was profound. Elliot stared at the papers as if they might ignite. Meadow became completely still, her face a mask of impassivity. A paternity test? Elliot's voice was barely a whisper. Why would you? How did you? The test indicates that you are not Tommy's biological father, I stated gently. There is a 99.7% probability that another man is his father, a man named David Chen. Meadow abruptly stood, her chair scraping against the floor. This is absurd, Loretta. I don't know what kind of twisted game you're playing, but sit down, Margaret. The utterance of her real name struck her like a physical blow. She actually stumbled backward, her face paling. Elliot looked between us, his expression a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. Margaret, Mom, what is happening? I presented the investigator's report, the marriage certificates, and the timeline documentation. Meadow's real name is Margaret Winters. She has been married twice before, and she has a pattern of dishonesty regarding her identity and past. She was involved with David Chen before she met you, Elliot. She left him when she was pregnant with his child and sought a new father for her baby. That's not true, Meadow asserted, but her voice trembled. Elliot, don't listen to this. Your mother has clearly had some sort of mental breakdown. Tommy was born 7 months after you two met. I continued relentlessly. You believed he was premature, but he wasn't. He was born precisely on schedule according to the timeline of Meadow's relationship with David. Elliot picked up the DNA results with trembling hands. I watched his face as he read them, observed the color drain from his cheeks as the numbers registered. This can't be right, he stammered. David Chen has been searching for his son for 7 years, I explained. He found you 3 months ago and has been observing from a distance, contemplating his next move. He approached me because he recognized what Meadow was doing to our family, the same isolation tactics she employed against him. Meadow was retreating towards the doorway now, her perfect composure completely fractured. Elliot, please don't let her poison you against me. Think about our life together, our family. Our family. Elliot's voice was raw, broken. Our family built on a lie. Our son who isn't actually our son. He is your son in every way that matters. You raised him. You love him. Based on a lie. Elliot slammed his hand on the table, causing the dishes to rattle. Everything, Meadow, everything has been a lie. From the living room came the sound of children's laughter, innocent and bright. Tommy and Emma playing their games, oblivious to the implosion occurring in the next room. There's more, I said quietly, and produced the records of Meadow's previous marriages. She's done this before, found men, married them quickly, isolated them from their families, then moved on when it suited her. You are not her first victim, Elliot. You are merely her most successful. Elliot stared at the documents, his breathing shallow and rapid. The cruise, he said suddenly. Your birthday. That wasn't a coincidence, was it? Meadow remained silent, but her silence was an admission. You planned it deliberately. You made sure Mom would be alone on her birthday while we were all together, enjoying ourselves without her. You wanted to hurt her. I wanted to protect our family, Meadow began. From what? From my mother. From the woman who raised me and loved me and would never. From someone who would eventually discover the truth, I interjected softly. That's what this has all been about, Elliot. The missed events, the last-minute changes, the gradual estrangement from your friends and family. Meadow needed to isolate you completely before you started asking questions she couldn't answer. Elliot looked up at his wife, who was not who she claimed to be, whose entire life with him was founded on deception. Is any of it real? Do you love me at all? Or was I just convenient? For the first time since I had known her, Meadow had no response. No smooth deflection, no manipulation, no perfectly crafted reply. She simply stood there, exposed and silent. That silence told us everything we needed to know. From the living room, Tommy called out, "Daddy, can we have ice cream?" Elliot closed his eyes, and I saw a tear trace a path down his cheek. "What do I tell them?" he whispered. "How do I explain this to the children?" "We'll figure it out," I assured him, reaching across the table to take his hand. "Together, as a family. But Tommy is still your son in every meaningful way. That doesn't change. But he also has a biological father who loves him and wants to be a part of his life. And perhaps, if we handle this correctly, that can be a positive outcome." Meadow turned towards the door, but I called after her, "Margaret." She paused, but did not turn. "David isn't going to vanish this time, and neither am I. If you attempt to flee with the children, we will find you. If you try to manipulate this situation or harm these children to protect yourself, we will stop you. Your reign of control over this family has ended." She departed without another word, leaving behind the sounds of children playing and the remnants of 7 years of deceit. But for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was losing my family. I felt like I was finally reclaiming it. 6 months later, I was in my kitchen preparing Sunday dinner when I heard the front door open and Tommy's voice calling out, "Grandma, we brought dessert, sweetheart." I called back, smiling as I heard the thundering of small feet running toward me. Tommy burst into the kitchen doorway, clutching a bakery box almost too large for him to carry. Behind him, Emma followed more cautiously, holding a small bunch of daisies. "These are for you," she said shyly, offering the flowers. Daddy said yellow is your favorite color. I knelt to accept the bouquet, pulling her into a hug she now readily returned. "They're perfect, sweetheart." "Thank you." Elliot appeared in the doorway looking healthier than he had in years. The weight he'd lost during those final months with Meadow had returned, and the stress lines around his eyes had softened. Behind him stood David, still a bit hesitant at family gatherings, but gradually finding his place in our complex new dynamic. "Something smells incredible," Elliot said, kissing my cheek. "Is that your famous apple pie?" "Tommy specifically requested it," I said, ruffling the little boy's hair. "Along with mashed potatoes and that chicken recipe you used to love. The one with the herbs?" Tommy's eyes lit up. "Yes, that's my favorite too, just like Daddy's." The ease with which he called both Elliot and David Daddy still took some getting used to, but the children had adapted to their expanded family with the resilience that only kids possess. Tommy called Elliot Daddy and David Daddy Dave, while Emma had simply accepted that Tommy had two fathers, much like some of her friends had two houses. David placed a bottle of wine on the counter, still moving carefully in what had been Meadow's domain. "How can I help?" "You can set the table," I said. The good china is in the dining room cabinet. It had taken months to reach this point. Months of family therapy, careful conversations with the children, and legal proceedings that finally concluded with Meadow's voluntary relinquishment of custody in exchange for avoiding prosecution for fraud. She had vanished again just as she had from David's life 7 years prior, but this time she had left the children behind. The transition had not been easy. Tommy had been confused and heartbroken by his mother's sudden absence. Despite all her manipulations, Tommy had been confused and heartbroken. Emma had been clingy and anxious, fearful that more people she loved would disappear. There had been tears, tantrums, and sleepless nights for all of us, but there had also been healing. Elliot had moved back into the house he'd shared with Meadow, but everything felt different now. The oppressive atmosphere of secrets and walking on eggshells was gone. David had rented an apartment just 10 minutes away, close enough to be part of daily life, but far enough to allow everyone space to adjust. "Grandma," Tommy said, tugging on my apron, "can I tell you a secret?" I knelt to his level. "Of course you can." He cupped his hands around his mouth and whispered, "I'm glad you found Daddy Dave. Now I have the most daddies of anyone in my class." My heart squeezed with love for this resilient little boy who had turned a complicated situation into a source of pride. "I'm glad too, sweetheart. And I'm glad Mommy Meadow went away," he added more quietly. She was always mad about something. It broke my heart that a 7-year-old had been so aware of the tension in his household, but it also reassured me that we had made the right choices. Children knew more than adults gave them credit for, and Tommy had sensed his mother's manipulation, even if he couldn't name it. During dinner, the conversation flowed naturally among the adults, while the children chatted about school and friends. David told us about Tommy's latest soccer game, where he'd scored his first goal. Elliot shared Emma's excitement about starting dance classes. We talked like the family we had become. Unconventional, perhaps, but real in a way that Meadows' carefully orchestrated version had never been. I received a call from my lawyer yesterday, Elliot said as we cleared the dinner plates. The divorce is finally final. How do you feel about that? I asked. He was quiet for a moment, watching Tommy help David load the dishwasher, relieved mostly, and grateful that it's over without more damage to the kids. Any regrets? About ending the marriage? No. About not seeing the truth sooner? He shrugged. I think I'll always regret that. How much time we lost. How much pain she caused you, especially. I squeezed his shoulder. You can't blame yourself for trusting someone you loved. David joined us at the counter, drying his hands on a dish towel. Has there been any word from her? Nothing, Elliot said. Her lawyer stated she doesn't want any contact with the children. No visitation, no phone calls, nothing. That's probably for the best, I said, though it still amazed me that any mother could walk away so completely from her children. At least this way the kids can heal without worrying about when she might disrupt their lives again. Later, after the children had fallen asleep watching a movie in the living room, the three adults sat around my kitchen table with coffee and leftover pie. These had become some of my favorite moments. Quiet conversations in the evening light, planning for the future, discussing the challenges of co-parenting in such an unusual situation. I've been thinking about something, David said, stirring sugar into his coffee, about Tommy's last name. Elliot looked up sharply. What about it? He's been Patterson his whole life. That's his identity, his school records, everything. I don't want to change that, but I was wondering. David hesitated, then pushed forward. Would it be okay if I took your name too? Officially, I mean David Patterson Chen, so Tommy and I would share part of a name, but he'd still be connected to you and your family history. The gesture was so thoughtful, so carefully designed to honor everyone's place in Tommy's life that I felt tears prick my eyes. Elliot looked stunned. You'd do that? I want Tommy to know that families can be complicated without being broken, David said. I want him to understand that loving someone doesn't mean you have to choose sides or pretend other relationships don't matter. Elliot reached across the table and shook David's hand. I think that's perfect. As the evening wound down and David prepared to take the children to his apartment for their weekly overnight stay, I pulled him aside. Thank you, I said quietly. For what? For saving my family. For having the courage to tell me the truth when it would have been easier to just disappear again. David was quiet for a moment, watching Tommy gather his backpack and favorite stuffed animal. You know what I realized that day I came to your door? I wasn't just losing my son. You were losing your family too. Meadow was taking all of us away from each other, piece by piece. But we stopped her. We did. He smiled. And for the first time since I'd met him, it reached his eyes completely. And look what we built instead. I looked around my house, at the children's artwork taped to the refrigerator, at Emma's forgotten sweater draped over a chair, at the family photos that now included David and truly reflected our reality. It wasn't the family I had imagined when Elliot first got married, but it was infinitely better than the hollow performance Meadow had orchestrated. After everyone left, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea, reflecting on how dramatically my life had changed since that devastating birthday 6 months ago. The empty house that had felt like a tomb now hummed with the echoes of family life. Children's laughter, David's careful questions about family traditions, Elliot's relieved conversation about his future plans. My phone buzzed with a text from Elliot. Thanks for dinner, Mom. The kids are asking if we can do this every Sunday. I told them that was up to Grandma. I typed back. Every Sunday sounds perfect. This is what families do. His response came quickly.
Like footsteps
Yes,
in fog.
this is what real families do.
Slows.
I set the phone aside and looked at the
Each
framed
beat
photo on
a
my
warning.
side table. A picture from last month's trip to the zoo. All
Dreams
5 of
shiver.
us crowded together in front of the elephant
Twisting into
enclosure.
a dissonant
Tommy was
wail.
perched on David's shoulders
Hands
while Emma
pulse.
held tight to my hand.
A
Elliot
deep
stood in the
inhale
middle,
before
one arm
silence.
around me and the other around David,
The final
grinning
beat
as if he'd
lands.
just remembered what happiness felt like.
Heavy.
We looked like what we were, a family that had been broken apart and put back together in a new configuration,
Pangs
stronger
fade into
and more
nothingness.
honest than before. It felt
A
full of
single note
possibilities,
bending
not
away.
conventional, but real, not perfect,
Silence
but true.
returns.
The house settled around me as
But the
night fell,
tension
but it didn't feel empty anymore.
remains.
It felt full of possibilities, full of the love that Meadow had tried so hard to destroy, but had never quite managed to extinguish. I had thought my 65th birthday had marked the end of my relevance to my family's story. Instead, it had marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where love wasn't conditional, where truth mattered more than appearance, and where being a grandmother meant protecting your grandchildren from anyone who would use them as weapons, even their own mother. Tomorrow was Monday, which meant Tommy had soccer practice and Emma had her dance class. David would pick up Tommy while Elliot took Emma, and they'd both end up back here for homework and dinner. It was the kind of routine that Meadow would have controlled and manipulated, but that now flowed naturally from our genuine care for each other. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I thought about the woman who had tried to erase me from my own family's life. Somewhere out there, Meadow was probably crafting a new identity, spinning a new story, searching for a new family to infiltrate and control. But she had left behind something she could never replace: the love between people who chose to fight for each other instead of giving up. She had taught us all what we didn't want to be, and in doing so, she had helped us become exactly who we were meant to be. For that, if nothing else, I suppose I owed her a twisted kind of gratitude. But mostly, I just felt sorry for her. She had a real family within her grasp, flawed and complicated, but genuine. And she had thrown it away for the hollow satisfaction of control, her loss, our gain. And finally, after months of feeling like a ghost in my own life, I was home. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching.